Welcome to this installment of the preservation workshop. This is to cover the disaster planning for the archives. So we are currently in the week known to librarians, museum workers, and other academics of that sort as Preservation Week. And so this week we try and highlight some fun and not so fun topics that we have to deal with our collections, our space, things like that, to better educate ourselves as well as our community. So today we're going to take some inspiration from Monday's dedication, which is May Day, which is Preparedness Day. So May Day as in, oh no, we need help. And so we're going to take a cue from that and look at how we can disaster plan for archives. This is going to be very much an overview of what you can expect when you're starting this big process, because it definitely is not a project that is just overnight. It's an ongoing process that is always being revised, updated, things like that. But to introduce myself, I am Catherine Whalen. I'm the Richardson-Sloane Special Collections Supervisor here at the Davenport Public Library. And currently I'm actually working on updating our disaster plan for the library. And so one of the things that I'll be looking at is how to triage things for our collection, be better prepared for the disasters that might affect our specific location and how we can handle those and when they come up, things like that. So what we will cover in a little bit more detail, we'll be covering what a disaster is versus what emergency is, types of disasters, the 4 stages of emergency management, basic emergency management terms, what is a disaster plan and why you need one or should have one, elements of a disaster plan, so those essential elements that you would need to have in any documents, some disaster plan templates. So there are plenty of disaster plan templates out there that you can access and use to suit your own organization, or you can also come up with your own as well. Essentially, it's a Word document that you can plug in what you want, but sometimes it's nice to have another type of form that you can have, see all the different elements that you might need and cherry pick what you want. And then how to connect with emergency responders, resources for dealing with disasters, recommendations for immediate action to preserve materials, and then some examples of damage. I wanted some more, and we had a couple good ones, but we actually got rid of the books before we knew that we were planning this program, and so I can't show you those ones, but there's some good examples out there of things that you want to avoid with your collections. So what is a disaster versus what is an emergency? So typically a disaster is defined as a sudden accident or natural catastrophe that has the potential to cause great damage or loss of life. And we also can look at disasters as a minor incident or a major incident. Then this comes from the Syracuse University presentation, and so they kind of define disasters as that, these types of categories. So a minor incident can be a leaking or dripping pipe, spills, things like that. Things that are common in older buildings that can be extensive and not noticed for a long time, that can cause mold. Pages stuck together, especially clay coated pages that are found in most art books. So if you have an art collection at your library, they're probably that shiny glossy paper that Once they're wet and they dry, it is impossible to separate the pages. So you want to try and catch those as fast as possible, to catch that and separate those. Also, another type of material that has those type of pages are serials. A minor incident is also defined as an event that affects 500 items or less. And so that's kind of they're kind of basic descriptions. A major incident affects more than 500 materials. That can be storm related, such as a flood, a big water main break, a fire, which fires not only have damage from the flames, but also from the water. The water suppression system, firefighters coming in, spraying water on the pages. So you kind of have a dual disaster in that fashion. Then major incidences also can may cause access to collections to be restricted for extended periods of time due to safety concerns. Could be a result of lots of different stuff. So you'll need to probably, for a major incident, get some external help to come in and help your organization. Minor incidences might be able to be aided by your staff that's inside the building that kind of knows what's going on. But an emergency is a serious, unexpected, often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. So they're very, very similar. And they have the same elements, but you kind of respond to them slightly different. Like an emergency, we think of more of like where we call 911, things like that. You might be calling 911 in a disaster, but not always. So things like that. Then there's some fun pictures. So we just had a minor incident in our space this year. It was from our humidifying components in our space that introduces humidity into our space. To help keep that stable, it decided to be a little crazy and party on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And so we came back into our space to find this crusty stuff, some like soot, dusty splatters on our walls, all sorts of fun, weird stuff that was really hard to wrap our heads around. But we had the space cleaned up. We had minimal damage to our materials, but that was definitely something that we were just dealing with after effects instead of doing triage and trying to salvage materials as they were still wet, things like that. So some basic emergency management terms include hazard identification and risk assessment. So this is HERA. This assessment study offers a systematic approach to assessing hazards and their associated risks. So a HERA safety assessment helps to determine the objective of an identified hazard and provide a technique to manage that risk. So within a disaster plan, you can look at things that your library, your space, your collections are at risk from or of, and you can try and think through those things before they happen and have a plan in place. We can't think of everything, but these documents are not, don't feel like you have to create a document all by yourself. You can definitely use a team, and this is what they recommend. You can be the author of the document, but then discuss it with other people and see what they think and where you can add more documentation. Just to even have a basic plan in place is better than going in blind and not knowing what to do when and how to handle a given situation. Then we have an emergency operating center. So an EOC is a centralized location of emergency response and recovery support operations during incidences. While tactical on-scene operations are conducted, this center supports and helps coordinate the response to these incidences, and is a place where people can go and is another place adjacent to the operations. So that can even be your space too. So I recently went to a disaster planning workshop where the library actually was able to be an EOC, so an emergency operating center. So they were helping their community, like provide food to the community, free Wi-Fi, things like that. But sometimes the library isn't able to do that because they're also in peril and in a state of emergency. So you might have to, that might be some other spot away from the damage, but close enough where people can manage the event from there. Then there's the incident command system. So this system is used by public agencies to manage emergencies. An ISC can be used by businesses to work together with public agencies during emergencies. So this is just a term to be familiar with, not necessarily that you have to have on your own, but when you're working with these other agencies and community partners, being aware of these terms is a really good thing. Then there's the National Incident Management System, NIMS. This guides all levels of government, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector to work together to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from incidences. So this is a system in place where we can all work together to recover from these disasters as quickly as possible. Then there's partner annexes. So this is a way to identify possible partners to coordinate and cooperate with these different types of agencies. So this is just a fancy term for that. And then a damage assessment. This is typically implemented by emergency management agencies that want to quickly understand the impact of natural disasters, catastrophic events, and immediately assign resources to appropriate responses and recovery activities. So this is something that you can include in your disaster planning and preparedness documents. And so you can also hear disaster plans being called disaster preparedness plan, disaster and emergency preparedness plan, all those types of terms that you might run across as well. Then, okay, so into the world of disasters, what types are there? Natural disasters include thunderstorms, hurricanes, tropical storms, which we don't really have to see too much in the Midwest, but we do get some hurricane force or style winds and things like that. So that might cause damage like blown electrical towers, things like that. Some damage that we might not always expect in this area. Flooding, which we're experiencing right now in Iowa, then along the Mississippi. Winter storm weather, extreme cold, extreme heat, tornadoes, earthquakes, and pandemics. So all those things have different effects on providing access to our collections, securing our collections, things like that. Everyday disasters, so a structural fire, a power outage or a blackout, or even a medical emergency. So that is all stuff that we have to keep in mind. And then we also have our man-made disasters, accidental or intentional. So one that I didn't always think about was cyber attacks, but that can be very damaging to institutions that have a lot of collections online now, or guides to their collection. So having that down or corrupted or unable to be accessed is very much a big risk. Civil disorder, having people not be able to get to your library, especially if you're downtown or in an area where that's being acted out, acts of violence or terrorism, hazardous materials, chemical, biological, or radiological or nuclear disasters or accidents, and dam failure. So all those things kind of, you have to keep in mind. You can try and plan for a lot of them. A lot of your responses are going to be similar to some of these. So you don't have to think, okay, how does one versus the other really affect you? You can try and come up with a general plan because it can be very cumbersome. And you also want to make this document pretty usable too. Then we have 4 stages of emergency management. So this is very cyclical. And so you have mitigation and prevention. So that is to prevent emergencies or minimize their effects. So that's kind of the one avenue. And then we have preparedness. So to take actions ahead of time to be ready for an emergency. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. So we're planning to be prepared for an emergency. Your response. So how to rebuild from an emergency, and then recovery to protect life and property in emergency. So how to salvage things, how to protect your staff, and the people that work at the library, and then think about how you can recover the materials. So those all kind of playing together, and they're all kind of a big circle where you can go, they all impact each other. Then, what is a disaster plan and why should you have one? So a disaster plan is really a guiding document that will help staff manage a disaster, or an actively maintained document containing procedures and information needed to prevent, mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies. So really, a disaster plan should help you alleviate chaos during an emergency, tells you what to do and how, protects the safety of people and property, facilitates a quicker return to normal operations, reduces loss. More prepared organizations mean a more resilient community. Disasters are occurring with more frequencies. So to have this document in place is a really good thing, because you don't want to be taken off guard and have a disaster and not know what or who to help, who to turn to for help, or how to help yourself. So those are things that you really want to try and consider when you're thinking about doing a disaster plan. It might take a little bit more work on the front end of actually creating the document and then putting it in place, because a disaster plan is also something that you don't want just to sit on the shelf. You also want to coordinate trainings and education for your staff so that they can feel emboldened to help during a disaster. And as we'll see from the elements of the disaster plan, it is not a solo operation or action. So it's definitely a team environment where you should be able to work with your whole library, even community members, to help deal and mitigate this disaster. Then, so we get into the elements of a disaster plan. So this screenshot actually is coming from the State Library of Iowa. They have created a really nice document that's free to download, that kind of combines a couple different templates that are out there, including their previous one. And so this is a pretty straightforward document that can help you formalize your ideas and get that information in there to a readable standpoint. And you also don't want this document to be so large that it's unusable. So some elements that you want to have in there are the immediate response, which that is a list of numbers that you want to have on hand when you need them. So 911, any numbers for fire or anything like that. So any emergency number for your area that you want to have in this document, have it in this first section. If there's a phone number that you can have for water incursion, electrical issues, building damage, computer damage, or collection damage, you want all those numbers right at this get-go. This is one of the first pages that you might want to check out when you have a disaster. Then we have our disaster response team. So this team can be made up of the disaster team leader, which it can be the leader of your organization, or someone who is wanting to be dedicated for that role. A communications coordinator, so how to tell the community that you are facing a disaster, how to communicate with other people that might also be having similar disasters, if it's a tornado or a flood that's affecting a large area, things like that. How do you communicate that information out to the public, or internally as well? So getting the news out to staff members who might not be living in that direct area, who might be planning on coming into work. Because maybe their power got knocked out, but they don't have any other way to access news, things like that. Administration and supply. So who's going to be in charge of that? And ministerial tasks of ordering stuff, making sure that everything's there. Collections care. So who's going to be in charge of taking action, salvaging materials, directing people to take care of stuff in a timely manner. Documentation coordinator. So you definitely want to have someone doing this job because it'll help for insurance purposes, grant writing if you have to replace materials or get help rebuilding your building, things like that. Facilities and safety, so someone in charge of those activities as well. And this can be from your own organization, and then whoever is interested, you'll have a primary person and then a backup. And then we have emergency services in contact. So building upon the immediate response call list, you'll also have all the various numbers of people in your community that you need to contact if there's an emergency. And so that includes fire, ambulance, police, county emergency management, contact, things like that. Then we have, you can also include utilities, things like that, and other services. One thing that you should definitely consider putting in there is the insurance policy that you have for your collections in your building. Because you don't want to be calling someone and not knowing exactly what is covered, things like that. So having that list of things and having your agent name and number as a quick contact in there, that's also very good. And then in addition to the insurance, you'll want to have a value estimations for your collection. So how much of your circulating collection do you have? Here at the Davenport Public Library, we have a robust local and genealogical collection. A lot of those materials are really hard to find other places. They're rare, they're valuable, things like that. So you want to make sure that you have a good listing of those materials that you can't recover. And so definitely have that in there too as a plan. And then for facilities, you want to have a section for that. This will include floor plans. This is vital for not only staff members to know where things are, but also first responders who are going to be trying to make sure that everyone's out, salvage the priority materials, things like that. Main utilities, so where to shut off your water, where to shut off electricity, gas, things like that. So making sure that you have all that information written down. Fire suppression, security, first aid, all those things should also be in there. And then we have our disaster response supply inventory. So those things you definitely want to keep in mind and keep them up to date. So kind of having different kinds of supplies, including personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, collection salvage supplies, record keeping, and communication supplies. So this will help you keep that all up to date. Make sure that nothing expires. Make sure that you have everything when there is an emergency that calls. And if you have more than one facility, having those at all three or multiple branches, you need to have that. And then also, if you have a specific collection that you know that you want to salvage, having those collection salvage supplies by those collections is very vital, or close to where you can access them when you're able. And then your salvage priorities. So what are you going to salvage first? And so you want to kind of see what's the most important that needs to be saved. This can include technology, collections, and administration files. So for us here at the Davenport Public Library, one of our biggest, two of our biggest collections that we want to save first are our technology files, our hard drives. And we're really lucky that we have them backed up at each one of our branches, which are in different parts of the city. And then also our special collections. We want to prioritize those things that if we were to lose something, what things could we really take a long time to get back or never even recover, things like that. And then you'll want to have a section about this plan, why you have it, who needs to be looking at it, things like that. So that's just a basic rundown, and hopefully we can someday have another disaster planning workshop that might be more intensive, where we can actually go over each one of these sections of the disaster plan in more detail, and really provide a better understanding and get some more voices in here talking about disaster planning and how this is a very important task. Then we have disaster planning templates. So I mentioned the State Library of Iowa's disaster plan template. That's really nice and it's free. And it's just a Word document that you can download. And they have a whole bunch of other like webinars and resources that you can check out. But one that might be familiar to you, or if it's not, it's from the Arts Prep, I believe. And it's called D-Plan, so disaster plan. And this is an online disaster planning tool. So there is a free version, which just gives you a basic guideline of a front and back sheets that you can kind of check mark things off that you want to be prepared for. But there's also an online subscription-based one where you can actually create your whole disaster plan online, have it available online from anywhere, and then also you can download it. Because with these documents, don't have them just live online. It's good to have a good working copy online where you can update it whenever needed. But in a disaster, you might not have electricity. You might not have access to any of your drives. You might not have access to your phone, things like that. So you definitely want to have that printed out and in a binder that you can access readily. But honestly, if you type in disaster plans, the Association College and Research Libraries has a really great page. The library, American Library Association has one as well, Library of Congress. University of Iowa, Illinois, all these places have a lot of great documentation that they've made available. So you can learn quite a deal about disaster planning and what you need to do to be prepared. Then connecting with your local emergency responders. So ways to connect, you can have the police and fire departments do a walkthrough of your space and identify some potential areas for risk. And also just get their opinions about various things. Invite them to an event at your institution, get to know them. Ask for help with an on-site assessment and emergency planning. So have them look at your document after you've created. Invite emergency responders to participate in your trainings and drills. So once you create your disaster planning document and you want to start implementing and training your staff on how to respond to an emergency, have trainings and drills and have fire and police and other responders come and join you and give feedback and help guide the training. And also food always helps. Placate them and bribe them with food to come and join you. And it also helps staff get involved too. Then what they should know, things that you really need to bring up to them and share, that your collection holds collective memory and culture for your community. So if you have a special collections, if you have a local materials that document your region and your community, definitely emphasize that and say these are where these items are. Your collections that can be replaceable, irreplaceable, especially if you have a local history collection. So identifying those and telling them about it. Libraries and cultural institutions that can be helpful in recovery. They can be helpful in recovery as information centers, community gathering spots, like that one example that I gave as a space for like handing out food, being a place for Wi-Fi access. And then give them your layouts. They may have them already, but you might have changed your floor plans for your library and collections have moved to a different spot. Telling them that floor plans, locations of building, electrical and waste and water systems, all that stuff is essential for when dealing with a fire or water damage where you have to shut off those utility supplies. Then resources for dealing with disasters. So we have a number of things that you can look at. So your town might have an emergency management director. So this might be with the county level or city, local or county emergency management center. So all those things might be wrapped up into one depending on your community, or they may be separate, or they may have positions that have dual roles. Your state emergency management public assistance officer. So someone who is working with this day in and day out. So for Iowa, we're really lucky. We have I'm Alert hotline. That's their number. This is the Iowa Museums, Archives, Libraries, and Emergency Plan or Response Team. So I'm Alert. So you can contact them, and there are representatives from across the state that can help give guidance and suggestions for what to do when you are facing a disaster in an incident. And this is offered 24 hours all over. It's for all cultural institutions experiencing emergencies or disasters. Then we also have national heritage responders. So I believe that's another state offer that you can call and get assistance. Our FEMA regional officer, we're Region 7, so you can call them as well. And then there's the Northeast Document Conservation Center, the NEDCC. That has an emergency hotline as well. So all these different resources can really help you with dealing with disasters. Then some recommendations for immediate action to preserve materials. And so you really want to establish priorities for your collection. So what if you can save materials, what can you save? And what should firefighters and first responders be looking for to salvage first if they're able? Things like that. Of course, first priority is getting all the people out, especially if it's a immediate disaster that requires action and removal of people from the space. Then you also want to rank the collections for evacuation. So moving materials into an area where you can address issues, moving to them to an offsite space, things like that. And what ones do you want to do that first to? So some considerations to keep in mind with prioritizing these things. The historic value, monetary value, the uniqueness of the item, and the ability to replace in the same or other format. So if a collection meets all those things for the first couple, you should prioritize those as the ones to get out first. And if you can replace it with other similar or like copies, then maybe that step should remain if it's not a priority. And then also, what records would you need to continue operating your library? So other things like that. What catalogs or records about your collection exist in what formats? Do you have irreplaceable materials like rare books or local history collections? So other questions to kind of ask yourself. And then some triage type things. So treating wet collections. So getting to those clay coated pages first, besides the other ones. You don't want to wait hours. So the thing that kind of damages collections the most in these situations is the lapse of time between the incident happening and then your response to it. So a lot of disasters that I know about happen over a long weekend or things like that. So ones that aren't like immediate, like floods, things like that, where you can try and move things out of the way before the flood waters come. If it's a flash flood, that's a little bit different. And so that's a different question. But getting those pages and things separated with interleaved pieces of paper, and you can find materials that are absorbent, getting them in front of fans, getting the air circulating, moving them out of the wet spaces. If the clay coated items, if you don't have enough fans and things like that, you can also freeze those materials and try and dry vacuum them so that they can be preserved and conserved in a different way. So there's lots of different stuff that you can do. What do you do with moldy or contaminated collections? So there's instances where there's a flood or a type of piping burst like sewer that contaminates your books, things like that. And just mold is just a constant issue with water. And then typically if you have a water incident and it shuts off the power to your building, it's probably going to be hot in there, depending on the season. And then it's wet and very humid. It's a breeding ground for mold. And so you want to take all those things into consideration. And then drying a wet space, so getting that space as dried up as possible, if you can, if you're able, if that's that type of situation. And then just some examples of damage. So, while I've been working here at the Davenport Public Library, we had a patron who was attending a program series, and she brought in a stack of home photos, photo collection from her family, and unfortunately they got wet at some point. They might have been down in a basement, something like that, and they got dripped on and they dried. They dried all together. And so it's kind of like the clay coated pages. Unfortunately, an expert conservationist might be able to help those materials, but most of the time it's just going to tear the photo underneath and damage all those images. So that's really unfortunate. In the photo that we have here, that was from our New Year's incident. So we have some spotting, water damage on this volume. And so you can see where it dried quickly. We have a book with some mold on it. We've had materials that have fallen into water, where some of the materials we were able to salvage and get them in front of vans and spread out in our spaces. But some of them, we had a board about the different types of materials for renovating our space about 20 years ago. And so it had all this different like textiles. It was kind of a scrapbooky display board, and that got wet, and it was not necessary to save it in its original form. And so we ended up getting rid of it just because it started to have mold on it, things like that. So we just decided to not do that. But there's many different examples. Fortunately, we have not had too many materials that have smoke damage and active fire damage, but we do have a collection that was stored in a crematorium. And so we have that type of smoky residue smell on some of our materials. And so we just sequester those and check on them every once in a while and see if they're less sticky. But you can also use baking soda to help absorb that those smells. You can also use the if you're trying to dehumidify a space, the capsules and crystals that can absorb water, you can use those as well. Not necessarily on the materials, but in the spaces that you're trying to dry up. But thank you so much for joining us today. There's so much more that we could talk about. This is a big topic, and it's a very timely one. I've been seeing disaster planning preparedness workshops all over the place. So it's another round of talking about it. But if you want to contact us, if you have any questions, our emails are out there, our phone numbers. Follow us on social media. We have a Facebook and Instagram. We have a blog, which I think we're going to be writing about preparedness this week. So stay tuned for that. And then we have other ways to access our collections. But I'm going to stop our recording. And then if you have any questions, I can answer those.